Good afternoon, members and officers. Welcome to the Governance and Audit and Standards Committee meeting. I'm Councillor Leo Madden, Chair of the committee. I'd just like to draw your attention to the following. Housekeeping, safety information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble by Queen Victoria statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, if you signed into the Guildhall, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. COVID-19. Please be assured that we have put appropriate cleansing and social distancing measures in place to ensure that this meeting is undertaken in a COVID-secure manner. A limited public speaking has been made available. Limited public seating has been made available. However, this meeting is also being webcast to allow the public to attend remotely if they so wish to do. Can I please ask members to remain seated throughout the duration of the meeting, and you are advised to wear a mask, face covering unless seated. Live streaming. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that the meeting will be live streamed and that the camera zooms in to show the speaker. This is linked to the microphones, therefore can I please remind all attendees to turn their microphones on to speak and then off again once you have finished speaking. Members of the public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. May I now please ask members to introduce themselves. I'll start with Councillor Stuart Brown.
Councillor Stuart Brown, Fratton Ward.
Councillor Charlotte Gerardo, Central Southsea.
Councillor Daniel Weems, Hilsey Ward and Vice Chair.
Councillor John Smith, Eastern Craneswater.
Councillor Lee Hunt, and I represent Nelson Ward, which is covering, like you, Chair, Stamshaw, North End, Tipner and Buckland. The others all speak for themselves, don't they? But Nelson doesn't.
No, you're absolutely right, yes. Thank you. A party political broadcast on... I don't... Thank you. Can I ask if any members have any interest on the agenda today? None? Okay, thank you very much. Could I ask the officers to introduce themselves? Sorry, I should have done that. Should I start with you, Paul?
Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor.
Elizabeth Goodwin, Chief Internal Auditor.
David White, External Audit Manager from Ernst & Young.
Helen Thompson, the Associate Partner from Ernst & Young.
Jessica Mott, Head of Commercial Property.
Tom Southall, Assistant Director of Regeneration.
Kenny Nash, Corporate Performance Manager.
Michael Lloyd, Finance Manager for Technical and Financial Planning.
Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you very much for that. Item 3 are the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of November 2021. Members, I'll go through those page by page for matters arising and matters of accuracy. And I'll use the big page number if that's okay. So page 7. Page 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I did point out in paragraph 6 there, in response to questions, it was confirmed that the right of the councillor to bring an item to a planning committee. But the penultimate sentence says, included on planning committee agendas with which only had objector. That should read one objector. Okay. Anything else on page 8? Page 9. Page 10. Page 11. Page 12. Okay, members, can I sign those as a true record? Oh, sorry, Charlotte, did you? No, can I sign those as a true record then? You happy? Thank you very much, members. Thank you. Can we now move on to item 4? Have I got an item 4? The next item I've got is item 5. Sorry, did we get sorry, I missed that. I think this should probably sent through the post to me and it hasn't arrived yet. You okay? Yeah. Oh, sorry about that. I don't know who's going to introduce. You okay? Leave it down to yourself.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a feeling that not only have we got a problem that came out, that not everybody's seen it, but do I understand that it's not printed very well as well? Apologies. That's kind of out with our control, but we'll do our best to sort of introduce it. I'm not sure why is there some interference, James? See if that seems to be better. Thank you. So in terms of the audit results report, David presented a version of this to the September committee meeting. I was unable to be present at that meeting. And at that point, we confirmed that the detailed audit work was complete subject to two key areas around property, plant and equipment, investment property valuations, and also the work that we do around the pension liability. The work's now complete, subject to a small query around the valuations and two other areas of work where we're concluding. So one is the review of our work around accounting for COVID-19 grants and a review of an updated cash flow forecast which supports the updated going concern disclosures. I think it's fair to say that the audit has taken longer to close out than we had anticipated when David presented in September. Combination of pressure on audit team capacity, but in large part was due to the level of scrutiny that we as a team have been under within the firm following the quality inspection on the 2019-20 audit. So there have been various steps that we've had to go through to demonstrate that we have done sufficient work, particularly in the area of PPE valuations. So we are grateful to officers both within the finance team, but more especially within the property and the valuations team for their patience in bearing with us, because I think they've probably had a very large number of queries. David is going to take you very briefly through the findings just in those two areas. So the other areas of the audit, we discussed those at that previous meeting. David, it might be helpful just to summarise slightly more than perhaps, sort of in slightly more detail than we had anticipated, given members have not necessarily been able to read all of the information in the reports. And then I'll just conclude to talk about fees, which has also moved on between the last meeting and now. So David.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So as Helen says, a lot of the conclusions were present in the version of the report that was presented in September, but if I focus on those which have moved on since then, this is with reference to section 2 of the report, the areas of audit focus. And the first of those which has moved on from September is on the big page 17, valuation of Lakeside North Harbour asset. This was reviewed by our internal valuations specialists, and the conclusion that we have reached is that each of the assets that makes up Lakeside, there are sort of 10 component assets making up the campus, was within the expected valuation range that our specialists computed, and therefore it's fairly stated in the financial statements. We have no matters to report on the valuation of Lakeside. The next area of risk which has moved on is on pages 18 and 19, which is again on property valuations. This is on the valuation of investment property and land and buildings which are valued with reference to market factors, existing use value valuations. The findings of this work are summarised on page 19. As Helen's kind of intimated, we tested large samples both of investment property and land and buildings. And across this area, we identified two audit differences. One was on an investment property asset where the yield that was used was outside of the sort of benchmark range. That led to a small variance on that asset, which when we projected that across similar assets in the population, came out with an overall understatement of the investment property balance of just under 1 million. And then on one land and buildings asset, there was a miscalculation in the computation of the valuation, and that one led to an overstatement of property, plant and equipment of just under 1.5 million. But we do note that there is a further individual asset difference a couple of pages on, and the net effect of those two is below our trivial level. It's 0.24 million. There were also then two sort of differences in methodology, matters that were pointed out by our internal specialists around purchaser costs and management fees, which are at the bottom of the page there, which are recommended for consideration going forwards, but they were not material issues for the accounts. And then the next risk on pages 20 and 21, so the last element of our work on valuations, and this is around land and buildings valuated at depreciated replacement cost and the housing revenue account or council dwellings. And again, then the findings of this work are on page 21 per the big page numbers. Again, we tested substantial samples here of both land and buildings and HRA properties. And there were three principal findings. So I've referred already, there was one land and buildings asset where again there was an issue with the computation of the valuation. That resulted in an understatement of 1.7 million, which nets against the one on the previous page, down, as I say, to 0.24. Then there were two methodological issues impacting the depreciated replacement cost assets. One was that there was no allowance made for a professional fees amount within calculations performed in the last 2 years. We undertook calculations to sort of quantify the total value of that issue, and that was an understatement of PPE of just over 4 million. But then going the other way, the valuations had included a contingency amount, which again our specialists felt was against best practice. So we calculated the overall effect of that, and that was an understatement of just under 4 million. So again, those two issues do net off against each other to a low value. The last point on that page then is just taking those two matters forward, and again with the recommendation that the approach to DRC valuations is revised in light of those issues going forwards. Then the other risk which has moved on, as Helen mentioned, is on big page 24, which is the pension liability valuation. When we reported in September, we were awaiting some work by our internal pensions specialists, to give us assurance over the model used by the actuary to calculate the pension liability valuation. That work has been completed, and there are no matters to report on the balance of the pension liability. I would then just draw attention to section 4 of the report, which is mainly, just let me find it, on big page 34. That really then just summarises those audit differences which I've highlighted from section 2. Management have determined that these should not be adjusted in the financial statements due to their overall net impact being well below our materiality level, and that is something that we'll be asking for confirmation of through the letter of representation. I then hand back to Helen just to touch on the audit fees section.
Thank you, David. So I just want to draw the committee's attention to page 46, which is actually talks about independence but includes the fee table, and wanted to confirm to the committee that the PSAA finally in December determined the fee for the 2019-20 audit, so obviously somewhat delayed, and they determined the fee variation for that year to be £48,112, as you can see in the table, and then the notes give a little bit more detail. Unhelpfully, PSAA decided that they were not going to consider whether any of that was recurrent or not, so we need to go through a similar process with PSAA again this year. And sorry, I should have said, for the benefit of members who are perhaps less familiar with the terminology, PSAA is public sector audit appointments, and they are responsible for determining the fees for local councils. So we will obviously, when the audit is concluded, which we expect to be within the next 2 weeks, to then be able to calculate a fee, discuss that with officers, then it goes to PSAA for their determination, but we will report as once we have a fee that officers either agree with or don't necessarily or are prepared for us to put forward to PSAA, we will report that to the committee. Chairman, happy to take any comments or questions that members may have.
Thanks very much, Helen. David, for that. Could I just... Sorry, I've just seen this for the first time, and it's my fault. And you're right, it's not... You have to make up the bits at the end, don't you? You know, which I find fascinating. It's just, I'm not clear... David, the points, that's fine on the risks and the concerns that you had, but when we actually get to that page 34, audit differences, does that mean that, having examined all this, that in fact we as a council, we benefited by almost £1 million, or was it there in the first place and there's only come... I wasn't clear on what you were saying there.
No, it's not really a case of the council sort of benefiting or otherwise. Most of the movements that relate to property valuations don't actually go to the bottom line of the council's financial statements. They don't impact the calculation of council tax for the most part, so they're reversed out through into unusable reserves. And as I say, the financial statements are, as things stand, not going to be adjusted for these amounts anyway, because they are below our materiality level, but we're reporting them to you as we're required to do, for your sort of agreement of that treatment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. John.
Just following on the valuation point, are you happy with the process going forward then? Because, you know, obviously undervaluing is okay, but overvaluing valuation, I know they've netted out this time and everything else, but I see it's cut off a little bit, but I see that you're happy going forward. What is the process you put in place then to make sure that valuations now come out more correct?
So I think in a couple of cases, the audit differences really just arise from, I'd say, human error, in the sense that they're just mathematical differences within the sort of flow of the calculation of the asset. So, I mean, there's always a risk that something like that would happen, but as I said, we did only identify it in two instances out of a very large sample. So we wouldn't necessarily expect a repetition of that. I think we're reasonably in agreement with the valuations team around the issues on professional fees and contingency. So I think, and those were the key ones value-wise. So I think we would expect those to be taken into account going forwards. And to say that the other kind of points which were discussed with our internal valuers were of less significance to the overall value of the asset piece.
Brian Stewart, please.
Thank you, Chair. Helen, just a quick question around the timescales for getting the PSAA to agree the 2021 end year fees. We've obviously, I think, only got one more governance audit and standards meeting left in this municipal year, which I think is on the 4th of March coming up. Do you expect, I know it's a fair chunk of work, but do you expect to be able to give us an idea of what that's going to be before the end of this municipal year, or is that likely to roll over into next year's session?
So I believe that at the end of last week or at the very start of this week, PSAA have finally given us the information that we need to be able to calculate this year, because we want to we don't want to put something in that we know they won't accept, and it's because it seems like a lot of effort and potentially discussion, you know, and hopefully not dispute, but certainly discussion with officers that might be unnecessary. So I think we would be able to calculate something to be able to bring back to the March committee meeting. It obviously won't be agreed with PSAA. As you can tell, it takes them some time to then go through their process, but ideally, yes, we would try and bring something back to the next meeting.
Okay, Stuart, thank you. Any other point? Councillor Smith, John?
Thank you, Chair. It was just on the capacity point. At last meeting, there was a question about the audit team's capacity, and it was mentioned again today. I just wondered what is the plan to address that in the long term, so that those things don't come up?
Really good question. I wish I had a crystal ball and an answer that I could give, that I had some confidence in that. Audit firms audit firms in general are struggling with sort of both recruiting and retaining auditors. The audit profession's under a lot of scrutiny, and whilst it remains an attractive profession for people to join to do their training, quite often once they have qualified, they then look for a job in industry, which in fairness sometimes is shorter hours and a little bit less stress. So that there's one side which is sort of what's the supply of auditors and being able to do that. So there's quite a lot of work going on. I'm sure each firm is going through their thought processes as to how to do that. The second area, which is how do we get back on track in terms of audit delivery? There was a publication by DLUC just before Christmas, which I think is called Measures to Improve Audit Delays, or local audit delays, something like that, which has a series of measures, some of which are aimed at the firms, some of which are aimed at councils, and some of which are aimed more broadly at the sector. So there's going to be some further thinking about whether accounts can be simplified to make it sort of slightly less tortuous to both prepare and then audit. There has been a decision taken that the deadline for next year's accounts for 21-22 accounts will be November, so it will revert back to November from September this year. And it has also confirmed that for the period of the new public sector audit appointments contract, for the 5-year period which starts from 23-24, that the deadline will be the 30th of September. So I think what DLUC is trying to do is to introduce a measure of stability into the market to allow everybody the opportunity to get themselves straight. What you may have noted, and it wasn't entirely clear to me the first time I read the document, is they are silent on the deadline for 22-23. So I think the intention is probably to see how everybody does as we complete out the 21-22 audit, and then maybe see if they move the deadline either to September or keep it in November, or who knows, they might put it at the end of October just to split the difference. So there is quite a lot going on both within the sort of strategic and regulatory side as well as within the firms to try and address this, but it's not a quick fix.
Okay, thank you. All right, members, happy to note this report. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, David. Thank you. Can we move on to item 5? There you are, Kelly. I saw you coming into the room. I'll hand over to Kelly Nash. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. So this is quarter 2 report. So we're already well into quarter 3, but this is the first opportunity to bring quarter 2 to the committee. As part of the regular cycle of quarterly reporting and presented to you within 4 sections, one of which is the overall director summary from activity in directorates trying to highlight key issues. The second of which is the performance appendix, which just picks up key activity and operational priorities. The third is more around corporate health, so trying to give a snapshot of the general health of the organisation in terms of financial measures, staffing measures, other areas around that. That's a new thing we've introduced this year and still very much a work in progress, and we're happy to feedback from the committee around that. And the fourth appendix is corporate projects and just giving you a sense of progress against key items on there. That's also considered by the Major Projects Board for the organisation, which is a member body which gets to look at some of those areas in a bit more detail, particularly if they are flagged as potentially red or other issues to highlight. As usual, bringing this in complete form to the committee and happy to take questions on any particular areas of concern. Quite often, as you know, because it's a very wide-ranging report, I won't be able to answer all of those now, but happy to take those away and either address those in the following quarterly report or directly if that seems appropriate in that case. I know at the last meeting there's a particular request for where the percentage is expressed to also show the denominator for those, what's the overall size of the population or cohort. Well, I've not been able to do that for this quarter because it's important that we get all that information forward. That is something we're certainly taking on board. Yeah, it was yourself, wasn't it, who asked that one? Yeah, so we're taking that on board and we'll be bringing that forward in future reports. So that's certainly something we haven't lost. And I think another area just to draw attention to is I know there's a blank piece of data which relates to planning data, which was of particular interest to the committee last time. Again, that was submitted to me slightly too late to put in the published report, but I do have those figures here and I'm happy to circulate to the committee outside of the meeting those missing pages. So that's all I want to say now, and I'd say happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Kelly. And as you say, of course, a wide-ranging report, a much shorter and crisper the ones we've seen in previous years.
Yeah, I'm sure that will surprise other members to find that it's shorter and crisper than we had in previous years, because it's still quite the doorstop. But yeah, I think much more digestible than it has been previously, and certainly we try and give as much graphic information now to make it that bit easier to interpret.
Yeah, thanks very much. Members, any comments or points or questions, anything from the report? Councillor Grada, Charlotte?
Thank you. I just had a question in terms of recruitment and retention, because there was clearly a pattern from the reports that were provided that there was a general sort of lack of positive morale among certain workforces in different departments across the council, and that came up a few times. So I just wondered if there was sort of a senior recognition of that and what the strategy was to try and tackle it as a problem.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that, and I think you're right to say also there are differences across different sectors in the organisation, which I think we'd probably expect, particularly given the period of time we've just gone through, really. A workforce survey has been undertaken, and I think we're currently in the process of analysing the results for those, and I would imagine that will be presented to Employment Committee in the usual way of things. So yeah, it's certainly a very live issue, and there's I think a pretty clear process for taking that forward to members and discussing where there might be particular areas of concern and actions to address those. So yeah, certainly in train, and definitely an issue that certainly there's a high degree of awareness around the need to look at that, as you say, both in respect to those particular sectors of concern, but also there are sectors where we know there are sort of employment market issues as well that we need to grapple with. So lots of very complex issues around that, and certainly, as I say, will be presented to Employment Committee in due course.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Any other points or comments, members?
Yes, Chair, just following on from that, corporate services was the one that was particularly picked up on, wasn't it? And I note in there that there's talk about collaborative working. Can you expand on that at all?
Sorry, could you just note about?
Just about collaborative working, really, and you were saying about this in the positives, it was that it was, the directorates were working collaboratively, and then there was this thing about burnout and members leaving and difficulty of people attracting higher rates of pay in other areas than that. I know it comes up, but particularly in corporate services, so I just wondered whether you could expand on that.
Yeah, so corporate services would particularly pick up the issues around staff resources, because that's where our human resource capability in the organisation is located, so that's why particularly gets discussed there. So not necessarily in respect of the corporate services area, but in respect to the whole organisation being located there. I think in terms of the collaborative working issue in particular, it's one of those things that as we've responded as an organisation to the particular conditions of the last couple of years, there has been a real sense that actually as an organisation everyone pulled together, people worked differently and with other partners both in the organisation and also outside of the organisation as well. And the obvious example is the collaboration with colleagues in the NHS, for example, in very different ways of working. And I think again, probably linked to the previous response, one of the things that everyone's really keen to think about is, well, how do we hold on to that really positive way of working, so that actually we don't just revert to doing things the way we've always done them, but actually there are some positive things that we can take from it in terms of the way we do respond differently and continue to work really, really strongly as a single organisation. So I think it's just noting that actually that has exposed where those opportunities are for working across the piece and really in collaboration with each other, both internally and externally. So that's the key references.
Okay, John, thank you.
Just one about adult social care. It just mentions that you're seeking to build project management support into core staffing. I just wanted to see if there's any update on that at all.
Thank you. That's not a particular detail I'm cited on. I'll follow that one up and come back to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members. We're happy to note this report, members. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Kelly. All the best. Thank you. We now move on to item 6, the Internal Audit Performance Status Report to the 10th of January 2022. I think Liz is going to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. This is our usual report to you, so it's narrating the progress to date in relation to the annual audit plan. You will note, obviously we include in there any movement within the audit plan. I think we've historically flagged to you that there is a little bit of a resourcing issue or capacity issue.
So there are a number of reviews to which I am taking out of the plan for this year, but they will be reconsidered for next year's plan, which we're currently drafting. This report also contains any results of audits that have been performed since our last reporting period. I wasn't going to go through them necessarily in any depth, but I'm happy to take and respond to any questions that arise. We are on target to perform sufficient work which would enable and influence the annual opinion. And beyond that, Chair, I wasn't going to go any further at this stage. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. Any questions or points from members? This report, as I sit up here freezing. Old bones. John, did you want?
It was only around about, it was on page 68 around the council tax, and it was a medium level you'd rated it at, and in terms of a robustness of debt collection, and I just maybe wonder that might be a bit high now given the rise in cost of living, etc. coming through.
A number of things have actually impacted on the ability to be able to recover the debt. Obviously, yes, you're correct, I would factor that in, but we've also had over the past 18 months a number of initiatives, central government-wise, which again has impacted on people's ability to repay. The council work quite closely, obviously, with individuals. There are various services throughout the council, so there is some within obviously housing, where there is a rental element as well that's attached to it, but there is debt recovery elsewhere. So they will do all that they can, but you are right. I think the longer term implications are that we may see a little bit of a trend upwards while it tries to resolve itself.
Okay, thank you. Lizzie, page 70, home to school transport. Is this the same issue that we dealt with some time back about licences? And well, it's déjà vu then, is it? And why haven't whoever's responsible made sure that whatever we decided years back is now in operation or not in operation?
There has been some improvements in some of the areas. I think the last time we brought a report to you, it was rated as no assurance. Can I hand you over to Paul, though, because he's probably got some additional details?
Yes, you are right, Councillor. It's the same area, and unfortunately the issues that have come up are the same issues that we had previously. As Lizzie mentioned, there has been some improvement. It was no assurance. It's now limited, but there is still some work to be done in that area. We do have agreed actions. They are put in for around, I think the latest is March 2022, so it would be something that we could potentially put in early in our audit plan for next year to follow up on to report back. But obviously I can go into detail on some of the exceptions if you need it, but they are similar to what we had previously.
Okay, Paul, thank you for that. I just see that the actions agreed are scheduled to be implemented by March this year. We've got a meeting just early March. Can you give us an update on this particular issue then? I mean, I'm not too sure what they mean by, when people put a month in, I don't know whether they mean the beginning or the end, but to make sure you're happy for our next meeting.
We can certainly give you a verbal update probably for the next meeting as to whether it looks like they are progressing. Due to the time frame for submitting reports and so forth, it probably only gives us a 2-week period before we start submitting the new set of committee reports. But a verbal update we will definitely be able to provide to see whether it's on track.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any other points, comments, members? No, thank you. This thing. Thanks very much. Sorry, members, I've got to ask you to do something. Note the report. Thanks. Members, happy to note the report. Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul and Lizzie, who'll be on again in a minute. Thank you. Right, item 7 is the whistleblowing annual report and policy. Lizzie?
Thank you, Chair. So on an annual basis, we tell you how many whistleblowing incidences have been reported through to us. They may be received via various forms. A significant amount, I would say, actually come direct to the Internal Audit Office. You will note that for the last 12 months, there are 6 that are recorded. This is an increase on previous years. And there is no necessary pattern underneath as to why it is that we are having an increase. I think our whistleblowing processes and framework are very robust. We encourage people to raise their head above the parapet and raise any concerns that they may have. Whether the COVID implications, pressures on resource are influencing the increase in numbers, which actually I think may influence the increase in numbers, and the fact that there is a phenomenal amount of exhaustion and fatigue within all of the directorates, that may be contributing as well to the increase that we have here. What I can say to you is that once they are received, they are investigated either by the Internal Audit Office or, where it is appropriate, within that various profession. So there are a number that are either in adults or children's services, and where there is a safeguarding issue that, or allegedly concerns around safeguarding issues, then they will be investigated by those particular areas. However, we do keep a watching brief. The second part of this report is we need to say whether we're making any amendments to the whistleblowing policy, and there are no amendments to make this time round. So it is to bring to your attention the number of cases and the policy, and to see whether you are happy with how we proceed.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Felicia. Just a few points, and I'll shout them in. Could I just say to members that we've been, we take these policies seriously. Where in the past we've been looking at this, our main concern has been for the whistleblower, and to make sure that the circumstances and the procedure thereof do protect the whistleblower. So if members do have a chance at some time to look at this in a bit more detail, please do so, and if there's any amendments that you'd like to see put in to enhance it, more than happy to do that. Lizzie, I just want to go to the schedule. Not a lot of detail, and that's the first thing I want to ask. Will we be getting a bit more detail once investigations have taken place? And I also noticed that some are under investigation. Are there the same? Are there different people making the same complaint, Lizzie, in relation to irregularities?
So in relation to whether you would get more in-depth detail, generally no. If there are significant process issues sat behind the concerns, then they may be brought to this committee. Some investigations, obviously, that we perform may result in disciplinary action, and the only narrative, to be honest, that gets brought back to this committee is whether the issue has been, whether there was an issue, whether it was substantiated, and whether it has been resolved. In relation to the second part of your query, which is, are they all the same? No, they're not. They're not even necessarily within, 2 are within the same specific service, however the others are all in other service areas.
Could I just proceed a bit? The May 2021 one, were contact with the WB. I thought that was a beer of some sort when I first read it, but I worked it out as whistleblower. Who declined to provide any additional data. Does that mean that this one is in suspension or been abandoned, Lizzie?
Very often the nature of how a concern is raised may be via an email address, which obviously doesn't really tell us too much information, doesn't highlight necessarily who the individual is, which is absolutely fine, because we need them to be comfortable raising concerns in whatever method they feel comfortable in doing. This particular issue, concerns were raised, but the content, and it was received via email, the content of the email did not explain sufficiently. I've noted that it's in relation to a local authority school, but it didn't even name which school it was. So it named a number of concerns but didn't give us any strands. So we went back to that individual to say, to enable us to take this further, can we have some form of additional information or a discussion with you? And we gave a couple of opportunities to do that and went back and finally we went back and we said, look, I'm really sorry. We won't be able to do anything unless you give us something else to follow through, which is why this particular... That is very rare because 9 times out of 10, people are then comfortable to sit. So whether the issue from their perspective they believed had been resolved, I don't know. But that's why we've had to close that one. If they come back on the table, then we're happy to explore whatever their concerns were.
We were talking earlier on, we had a little session on complaints against members, and I was just wondering, are these all the whistleblowing issues that have come up, or there's some that might have come in at the beginning, you looked at and decided not to proceed with them? This is a lot. And if that was the case, you decided not to proceed for some reason, that would be in the schedule as well, Lizzie, would it?
You're right, Councillor. It would always be in the schedule. We have something called an investigation steering panel, which has been set up now for a number of years. The monitoring officer sits on that. The Section 151 or deputies sit on that, and either myself or Paul will be in attendance. And once something is received, it goes to that group because we can have the discussion as to who is best placed to deal with it, even if it is deemed we can't actually do anything at that particular stage. It will always be recorded on here because it is right that we need to tell you how many we have received under this badge. Some individuals will come to us. I've had members of the public come to us and say, I'd like to blow the whistle. If they are not remunerated in some way by the authority, they're not classed as a whistleblower. Now, those don't get brought forward to you because it's only those that we deem to be under that classification that will be recorded in this particular schedule.
And I just had one last question on this. Once the investigations have taken place, Lizzie, because the third one down there just says investigated but gives no further information, will we get more detail as to how it was settled and people were satisfied? I'm not saying that mentioning people or departments or whatever, but will we get a bit more detail than we have at the minute?
We can certainly bring back a level of detail to you so that you can have some comfort that it has been dealt with appropriately. You're right, the finer details wouldn't be included in that, but I think slightly more information, obviously, than what is contained in here may be useful to you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gerardo, sorry for holding back. Charlotte.
Thank you, Chair. Just a bit of feedback in terms of the sort of the policy itself. I really appreciated the reference to trade unions and the suggestion that people, have the right to go have some sort of representation in these meetings. So I just wanted to say I really appreciate that. So it's really good to see that in the policy. I also just wondered, I understand on so page 79, big page 79, scope of this policy, you don't want to give a really, really long list of potential issues that you might raise, but I just thought, given that a number of issues from this last year have been in relation to safeguarding, that perhaps it might make sense to add safeguarding as a bullet point there, as it's coming up quite often.
Very useful feedback, thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Okay, members? Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, Stuart. Sorry, Councillor Bryan.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, if I may. I've had a quick skim through the policy. Forgive me if I've missed it. Is there anything in there around the timescales around which complaints are dealt with? So, if a whistleblower raises an issue, we get back to them within X amount of time, it's investigated within X amount of time, they can expect a response or to have it closed within a certain amount of time. Because obviously one of the open complaints is still dating back to November. I noticed one from November had been closed and one was still under investigation. Now I'm guessing certain investigations may take longer than others, but is there an expectation of time frame?
There is an expectation of time frame in relation to when the initial concerns are raised and our response to the whistleblower. In relation to the investigation, that's, you're quite right, becomes more difficult because they can take any length of time. And in some cases, it is actually quite appropriate to get somebody in external to the organisation, which again kind of influences. So you're right, from recollection, there isn't anything in the policy as to our response. I think what would be very appropriate would be to put in there our commitment to the individual raising the queries in the first place as to what they can expect within us responding initially. That back-end one, though, I think is difficult and we shouldn't put in there. We do make very clear as well, though, to the whistleblower that just because they are raising those concerns, we are probably very limited with what we can go back and disclose to them, because very often it's very inappropriate, particularly if it's been, there's been a disciplinary as a result of it. So we do explain that early on, and that I think is captured in there with the expectations as to what they can receive from us at a later stage. But I think the time frame around we will contact you as soon as we are aware will definitely be included.
All right, Stuart. Thank you. Okay, members. Thank you. Thank you, Lizzie, for that. Are members happy then to note the report with the Appendix A and Appendix B? Thank you. The next item 8, is the Treasury Management Monitoring Report for the third quarter of 21-22. I think it's Michael. Hi, Michael. Michael Lloyd.
Yes. Okay, so in summary, our activities have remained within the Treasury Management Policy. We haven't undertaken any borrowing this year. Our investments are currently having a return of 0.42%, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Michael, for that. Councillor Wings, Daniel?
Just with inflation rising above, well, hovering around 5%, how's that going to affect investments for the long term?
Well, because inflation's rising, it has become, I think, a source of concern for the Bank of England, and we would expect interest rates to rise as a consequence, but there is really, I think, no way of getting away from the fact that inflation is going to exceed the interest we can earn on our investments, and therefore they are liable to decline in real terms whilst inflation is so high.
Okay.
No, where's he gone?
This side. Councillor Hunt.
There you are. Yeah. So these are the bits of the money the council has sort of day by day to invest in the markets, aren't they? You know, it's just bits and pieces that are not hanging around, but we put into various accounts from day to time. We're getting about just less than 0.5% return on them, which is better than I can get in my bank account.
Yes, you are absolutely right.
Yeah. So we're making the best use of the money that we got whenever we can.
That's correct, yes. I mean, within the constraints of security, i.e. not investing in a way which causes us to lose the principal, and meeting the council's liquidity requirements, we obviously get the best yield we can within those constraints.
And that's not a bad yield by today's standards.
No, it's in line with what we should be getting.
Okay, thanks very much. Sorry, Councillor Smith.
How would we fare if there was a downgrade in the credit ratings?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that there's normally a warning of a downgrade because you've got the basic credit rating, but there's also outlooks and watches given by the rating agencies, which are a little bit like an amber traffic light. So if something's on negative watch or negative outlook, we would either reduce or stop investing with that institution, so that hopefully our investment, or most of them, would mature before the actual downgrade happened. The other thing is that we only invest at investment grade, and should a counterparty or institution fall below that level, it doesn't automatically mean that it's going to collapse. And most of our investments are well into the investment grade. And going back to Iceland, the Icelandic banks, I mean, the councils that invested in them, which we weren't one of them, they did get nearly all their money back, albeit they had to wait several years before they got it back.
Sorry, John, yeah.
So it's a hope that we would be out of it before, rather than picking up on your words there.
We'd certainly hope to be out with it before then, but in reality, I think because the organisations we invest in have a higher credit ratings, it would be pretty unlikely for us to lose a principal.
Okay, members. Thank you. Michael, thank you very much for that report. Members, you're happy then? There's 2 recommendations on the report. Are they agreed? Thank you very much. Thank you. Can we now move on to the item 9, which is the report to Governance and Audit on complaints received into alleged breaches of the Code of Conduct by members of the Council for the calendar year 2021. Peter Bob's going to do this, but I just say there's clearly it's on the wrong colour paper. It actually should be on white paper. It's not a confidential report. Somehow the human error has made it look as though it's confidential, but it isn't. Okay, so apologies for that. Peter.
Afternoon, Chair. This is my standard report to this committee on the basis of last year's returns to me as formal complaints engaging the members' complaints procedure. Things to note for this year is actually there's only been 4. That doesn't mean we didn't have more, that just means that 4 got processed. Some got knocked out on the basis that they were essentially not engaged in the local assessment criteria, ergo I could not even take them on to be dealt with. The other thing to note is the references of the complaints are tending to be the same things. For example, failed to treat others with respect, conducted themselves in a manner that could reasonably be regarded as bringing the office of themselves or the authority into disrepute. I've done some training with that this afternoon, and they tend to be the sort of catch-all ones that are ticked. The good news is that they were all dealt with by IFP, which meant an engagement of independent persons and at my level rather than yours. There was no engagement of the subcommittee by way of review, and there was no scheduled or otherwise dealt with formal hearing. The good news is it's fairly low-level stuff. And as I was saying to you before, the 4 that I had on the books were all based upon social media in the sense of usage of social media and complaint by reason of members of the public and or members making about a member in their usage of social media. So the usual message is just be careful when you're using it and be cognizant of the fact that people watch it 24 hours a day. There are 3 recommendations for you to consider. The most important one is being to thank the independent persons who have all been on the books for a number of years now, apart from the last 3, the new ones. The 2 of them are fairly senior now, and they need to be thanked, as do all of them. They are a great source of support for members and myself dealing with the IFP panels. The other recommendations are essentially to note the report and to consider whether you require to task me with any further action relevant to the discharge of my statutory function. Thank you very much, members.
Thank you very much, Peter. Just back to the little training session we had in a point a point that you've made on the first one on the 9th of December 2020. The agreed outcome was that the member will provide a full, something or other, apology to the councillor. Did that happen?
On that one, I think it did. I have to say there have been a couple that haven't as yet dealt with apologies. And that's not to say they won't, it's just to say they haven't done it.
And with those that haven't done it, there's no sanction we can take?
Not realistically, above and beyond me actually taking the step to name the particular members, which is something I tend to avoid, and all those members being sanctioned on the basis that clearly members of the public would take a view that not responding to the monitoring officer is not a particularly good thing to do in a vote context. There isn't a great deal to do. I can't sanction really at my level unless it goes to a full hearing where your level of sanctions engage, which it won't. If I make a recommendation, there's no review to it. If I don't make a recommendation, it can be reviewed and or go to a subcommittee and or a potential hearing of that subcommittee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members, any questions or points? No, okay. Can we note the report and place on record our thanks to the independent members? Okay. Thank you very much, members. Thank you. We now move on to... We do have two more reports to come, but some bits on white paper, which are in the public domain, and some on orange paper, which are confidential because, for the reasons given, we have to move the exclusion of the press and public for the bits that are on the confidential papers. Okay, members? Is that all right? Thank you. Thank you very much. So can we now move on to item 11, which is the report documenting the effect of COVID-19 on PCC's investments. I don't know if it's Jessica. Jessica, you want to do with it? Or Jessica? Okay, Jessica Mott. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to report on the fund. There's lots of facts and figures in the report, some of which are confidential, which has just been noted. The report contains a lot of information. More than happy to answer specific questions, but there's just some general points to make ahead of that. Firstly, that the pandemic obviously is ongoing, and we remain agile to the needs of our tenants and the needs of the specific assets that we manage to manage those things accordingly. But another point to make really is around the asset classes and the resilience of our tenants and occupiers within those. During the pandemic, we've seen probably a similar picture to other landlords across the national picture, particularly in industrial and logistics. Those sectors have performed well and do so within our National Investment Fund as well. Retail is a different picture. Out of town seems to be recovering a bit, so we've seen some of our tenants come back to us and start to pay rents in the normal way, but in town remains quite poor, save and except for some neighbourhood shopping areas which are well supported. Offices, finally probably want to say, is really on the watch list. Obviously people are still working at home extensively. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Jessica. Could I just, on top of page 101, sorry, I wasn't clear from this, I think it's the first time a report of this nature has come here. It just says PCC were not in a position to waive rent repayments or to offer rent-free periods. Did they have a choice?
As a landlord, we could have taken the opportunity to offer rent-free periods if we'd wished to. That was a decision that was taken further up the chain in terms of, it wasn't a property decision, it was essentially a Chris Ward's decision.
No, fair enough. I just wanted to confirm that we could have done it, but having looked at the cases or whatever, we decided that not to. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Huntley.
Chair, just wanted to sort of make a comment, and I don't know if officers will agree with me, but they may want to. But the £23 million in rental income that comes out the promise is equal to a rise of about 52% on council tax, would it not be, if we didn't have that money? Is that about right? It's about £500,000 per 1% of the council tax.
I think there are experts here that Michael Lloyd's going to tell you.
Yes, it would certainly be significant, yeah.
Yeah, so if the council had not been wise and invested money and in property and so on, because of these dreadful cuts from the government over the years, we'll be in a very serious position of having to raise the council tax enormously. And indeed, if we'd have done some of the more risky purchases or investments that we've been looking at recently, that could wipe out all the benefit of our, so for example, I'm looking at energy companies which are collapsing like nine pins at the moment. If we'd invested our money into an energy company, the whole of that 23 million could be wiped out in 1 year ongoing. So the council has to have this scrutiny and scrutinise itself to safeguard investments on behalf of council taxpayers.
Yes, I mean, what you're saying is broadly right. If we invest in something and then it's not worth what we paid for it, potentially that would be a hit on the general fund balances and would mean that council tax would have to rise or services would have to be reduced or something.
So I think this council has done quite well over a number of years, really and truly, in its investments. We may not always agree with each other on how we do it, but by and large, it's investing very well on behalf of the local council taxpayers to make sure that the council tax stays lower, or because we couldn't put it up any higher because of government rules, we wouldn't have swinging cuts amounting to an enormous amount of money across the council.
I think you've made your point, Michael. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. That's the white bit. If you actually move to the confidential appendix A, that's also a white bit. So I think obviously someone who was doing the, not officers here, I think, but somebody was doing put the wrong one on the orange paper. I suppose if we have anything to say on the confidential appendix A, we need to do that in exam session anyway. So we may well come back to that. Members, so that's that bit completed on item 11, and item 12 is the procurement management information. Unfortunately, is it Richard? Is it Richard Locke, isn't it? Richard, as you probably saw from a text or email yesterday, has had COVID-related incident in his family and can't be here, and can't offer anyone else. However, we do have Superman has jumped to our defence, and that's Peter Balfe.
Yes, thank you, Chair, for those august words. Just to say I'm wearing the right type of pants today, so everything's good on that front. I thought I'd speak to Richard's report on the basis that, having read it, it doesn't give me any concerns, and I think members need to look at the credibility and consistency of the report, in particular page 112, which starts off with confirming the various corporate services, cultural services, executive and finance, port, health, regeneration have no concerns in an audit trail. What Richard also says in a sensible way, if you look, is the page 117 deals with the issue of conclusions on the back page. There you need to look at the level of contract variations of red. It's 0%, 3 contracts, 0.15% of all contracts. The area that he raises as concern for you is the no KPI schedule, which suggests that there are 615 contracts that don't have a KPI set schedule. So that's a note to you for concern, but it is not a concern to him in terms of our contract compliance, both in terms of the contract procedure rules and the statutory public contract regulations. So I would commend that report to you, and I'm happy to speak to it for the simple reason that Richard will correct my inaccuracies next time he's back. He has COVID and obviously can't be here today for those reasons. It's the same consistent report that he produces on a quarterly basis, and it's familiar to you. Having looked at it in terms of governance and risk, I don't have anything that jumps out to me that would cause you concern that I should alert you to be cognizant of today. So in those circumstances, rather than putting it off to cause difficulty at the next meeting, I thought I'd speak to it on his behalf. So happy to field any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter, on that. And these are on obviously in the public domain paper. Councillor Brown, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Peter, appreciating that you aren't Richard and may not necessarily know the answer, for the 615 contracts that do not have a KPI scheduled, is it likely that there's a large chunk of those for which the work that it relates to isn't something that can be measured in a KPI fashion, or is it just that they haven't gotten around scheduling 600 contracts worth of KPIs yet?
I think the reality is that, given COVID, given the timbre of the report, Richard, in the best will in the world, is focusing on it. I think at that chance you could say that they're the least ones that worry him, and the truth of it is they don't have KPIs, but they're not such as that he's particularly worried about it. It is business in progress, basically. And it's a resource implication. Simply put, they're a small team. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Stuart. Any other questions or points, members, on the public domain paper? No, okay, thank you. I think we can then agree that paper, but we will now move into exempt session on the two reports. Thank you.